Vivian Sauer. I'm Director of Program Development with the Jewish Family Service. I've been with the agency for a little more than 30 years. Yeah, seems like a lifetime. It is a lifetime. And Legacy Corps, I actually got the contract with Legacy Corps several years ago. It's a 2-year contract, and then we stopped for a year, and then this is the third year of a third-year contract. So we've had several years of experience. We've met great people. It's really been kind of a win-win for everybody involved, even though it's a little cumbersome to sometimes administer the program because it's big bureaucracy. But you get to meet great people, and our clients have benefited tremendously from the fact that we have people who are so devoted and who are willing to spend time with them. So it's been a good plus. And at the beginning we had a lot of trouble, although I guess not so much now, finding people who had such strong connections to the military. Because that's one of the requirements, that we really recruit people who have, or either were themselves or have relatives or, even deceased relatives who have something to do with veterans. And at the beginning it was a lot harder to find, but I think now we're in a better place. So Serena's put the program in a better place, so we'll say that. Okay. So I'm going to start with some conversation about the kinds of conversations you have with clients, and then we'll do a little bit on communication and active listening. And again, this is going to be very participatory, not, it's really going to come from you, not from me. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the legal ethical issues that you might not have covered before. And we're going to talk about aging and then elder abuse. So we'll talk about child abuse, but since you've, been working at DCFS, then you probably, I don't know if you need that or not, but you probably won't encounter that as much here, because you'll be matched with older adults. So you might encounter, if there's a child in the house, you might encounter that, but probably not as much. So.
So with this volunteer position, would we be considered mandated reporters as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the mandate here would be for you to report your suspicions to your supervisor, who is a mandated reporter. So it's kind of a little bit of a second-hand mandated reporter, but yes, certainly it falls within that. Okay, so let's talk first about building rapport with clients, and you're all pretty experienced, so you probably have more thoughts than I do, but the first thing that we try to do is to engage and to build some rapport and to find something that will engage the client. So what are some thoughts that come to mind when you think about how to engage, how to build rapport?
Well, I used to do a lot of insurance investigating, and I'd go to people's homes that I had never met before, and the purpose would be to interview them about the incident. And typically, I've been around to many countries, and if they happen to be originally from a particular country that I visited, I would be able to make a rapport on that basis. Other connections, other bases of connections were, like if I saw a painting, I like paintings, and I'd make a comment, or if they had a dog or a cat,
I would be out the door.
Oh.
You just have to pick up something that it might be a common
Right, so
thing.
to find that thread when you go to somebody's home, well, that's really interesting. You have a painting on the wall. or where's it from? Even a non-threatening type of beginning, so that you're not coming in saying, whoa, this place is a mess, and how can you live like this?
Even your tonation, the way you speak to them, your demeanor, being open versus closed off, and hopefully smiling. So just having a warm presence.
So, in a way, you're in a bit of an ambiguous position, because you're not coming in as a friend, but you're not coming in as a
Social worker.
correct, or a nurse, or so you want to be friendly, and I don't know how much you've discussed in terms of boundaries.
Not yet.
Okay. You want to be friendly and warm, just as you suggested. But you're not there as a friend, and that's sometimes a really hard line to negotiate. Who are you and why are you here? Well, I'm here to provide some companionship, or I don't know what the parameters of what you're going to be doing. But that's something that comes up pretty often. Who are you and why are you here? And kind of peer support, which is a very big topic nationally lately, and the value of having a non-professional engaged, even though you might be a professional, but you're not working in that role. When you're visiting the person, is really sometimes very difficult for people to understand and to define. So just be aware that you're going to have some kind of answer ready. I'm not your friend, but I want but I want a friend. The other thing that and I really appreciate your comments about finding that common thread at the beginning, if they come from a particular country that you've been to. Oh, I've been, that's great, because it sets the tone in a really non-threatening way. What might be some other appropriate topics of conversation, when you're engaging with somebody? Well, assumedly, they'll have some connection with veterans in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if they, how direct the people they're going to be matched with are going to be, if they themselves or their relatives, but that's one area. What would give you a clue if conversation didn't seem to be flowing?
Maybe body language. Body language? Their body language?
Your body language.
Silence.
There's no response. That's a good clue. That's a really good clue. But there are some topics that are fairly sensitive, depending on what their experiences have been, and how open they want to be. So, sometimes it's a little bit of a trial and error. You're pretty safe usually asking about things like what kind of work did they do? Do they have any family? Now that gets to be a little dicey sometimes too, depending on their relationship with their family, but it's a pretty innocuous kind of question to start with. How long have they lived in Los Angeles? What they do before? Are they retired? What brought them to retirement? What kind of activities do they enjoy? Do they have hobbies? Yes, I'm freezing also, actually. I left my jacket in the car.
Oh, no.
Do they have hobbies? Things like that. Before you start getting into things like who helps them in the house, and do they have, are they able to prepare their own meals? Are they, what kinds of health problems do they have? That's more of a social worky kind of ask. And it'll come up, but it probably will come up much later in conversations. People tend also to tell you their problems, because that's just natural. Somebody who's willing to listen, like, why wouldn't you tell me their problems? So I guess I would say that it probably would be useful and helpful to not focus on the problem, because your role is really not going to fix the problem. And, you know, if it's something easy, then, you know, you certainly can encourage them to use their own strengths to problem solve. If it's something that seems a little more complicated, maybe you should probably bring it back to the supervisor. Mm-hmm. And you can say to them, you know what, I'm going to go back to the agency and find out if there's somebody who can help you with this.
And sometimes it's hard because you want to fix their problems, but you got to make sure you know that's not your job. I'm not here to fix your problems. Like,
and you know, sometimes it's not even good for them to have you fix their problems, because that really puts them in a position of not being able to use their own strengths to fix it for them. So we have the warm presence. We have engaging them around some topics of mutual interest. Anything else you can think of? What do you know about?
Maybe hobbies.
What?
Hobbies.
Hobbies, yeah. You know, and you might be shocked, like maybe you collect stamps and they collect stamps, or I don't know.
Well, you know the old saying that you don't talk about politics or religion.
Right. That's probably true. That is probably a good thing. You're right. You're right. So you haven't done much on boundaries yet, have you?
no.
Okay.
We've established that you do need to set one. But
Right. Okay. And have you been using this book at all? The Legacy Core Training Manual?
I have something sort of like that.
Okay, so this we developed the first year we had Legacy Core. The first year we had Legacy Core, so I still have the manual. It's been updated in certain parts, but Doreen Clee, who did this, has a lot of really good material in it, and if you want to use or take any of the material and hand it out, you know, please feel free. So, in your previous work, what kind of boundaries did you have established with either in your work life or volunteer work? What kind of boundaries were you able to establish?
And working with in clinical research or working with clinical trials, a lot of the patient information you have to be sensitive to. So it's like just a lot of confidentiality.
Confidentiality issues. And have you covered confidentiality?
No.
Okay, so confidentiality, and you have the policies that people have to sign?
Yeah.
Okay. So confidentiality is, you know, major in all social service agencies, obviously, and particularly when you're working one-on-one with clients, they need to know that what they say to you is really confidential, except in certain instances where, you know, it would be dangerous for you to not share that information. So if they say to you, you know, I have 2 bottles of pills and I'm going to take them tonight, that's obviously, you know, confidentiality doesn't exist there. But in general, if they, you know, things like, I wish I had a better relationship with my son. You know, he lives next door and he's really, you know, I don't have the kind of relationship. He's into things that I don't approve, whatever it is, but you need to reassure people that your time with them is for them and is confidential. Now, sometimes people want more of your time than you're able to give. And that's, again, limit setting. And then you say, you know, I have 2 hours to spend with you today. Oh, really? You know, and at the end of 2 hours. Well, I just want to tell you one more thing. I'd love to hear it's, you know, next time when we meet, I'm happy to, you know, save that thought because we're going to start with that. I really want to hear what you have to say. But today, you know, I was able to spend 2 hours with you. So that's also, you know, kind of limit setting and boundaries. You've been Legacy Corps. What kind of boundaries you've been in America, what kind of boundaries did you have to establish there?
Just comfort zone, comfort level, personal space.
So talk a little bit more about personal space, because you're going to be in somebody's personal space.
Well, I think for the most part, most people, you can, there's, I don't know how many feet it is, but there's...
Some of that depends on culture.
Yeah. And so for the most part, you can kind of more or less tell based on someone's response, because if someone gets a little too close, normally they'll back away or become closed off or turn. So just really looking and reading someone's body language. Or if that doesn't work, sometimes it's okay to ask, am I violating your personal space? Am I too close? Is this okay?
Right. Or is it okay if I sit here?
Mm-hmm.
Would you prefer I sit over here or over there? What's better for you? Okay, good, great. Larry, what about you? What about, some boundaries when you either work with a client or when you go into somebody's home? What sort of comes to mind for you?
Well, probably how close you are to the person. You want to be close enough that you can communicate well, but not too close.
Right. You want to be able to hear them. You want them to hear you if there's a hearing problem, right? What about things like sharing information about yourself?
Us sharing it or them sharing it?
You sharing information. Assumingly they're going to share information with you, but you sharing information with them.
I guess it depends on what exactly the topic is. Like if we're talking about similar hobbies and stuff like that, but I wouldn't talk about like crazy vacation experiences or,
That might be really interesting.
Well, yeah.
I used to work at an agency that was an emergency shelter, and the office was in the shelter. So I was like working where our clients were living. So sometimes the boundaries and the roles would like be blurred or crossed, and you'd have to sort of establish what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate for just, hey Serena, I want to go, or just whatever it happened to be. So
I would say also like in working in offices, like touching things, like people taking things off of your desk, or
Do not touch me.
Yeah.
Right.
So like I guess like touching people's things or people touching your things.
Right. Yeah,
But as far as sharing your own personal information, I don't know, the way I see it, we're going to be their friend. You might say their professional friend.
That's a good way to put it, a professional friend.
And as such, I think they would want to know something about us, something like, where we come from.
Like, who are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly legitimate and perfectly appropriate, but you need to be comfortable with what you're sharing. And it also you need to check yourself to see if it's about your agenda. Mm-hmm. You're there for them and not the other way around. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, you might have had, in your own personal lives, very significant issues and problems, or you might be going through something as you're visiting, and it's too easy to fall into the trap of, even if it's a professional friendship, here's somebody who, I relate to them, they relate to me, but the agenda really is about them and about your support of them. If you're starting to think that or feel that, wow, it feels really good to be able to tell them my story and they can really be helpful to me, that is a real red flag that the tables have turned. And that the agenda is not about them anymore, it's about you. Now, you are hopefully likely to feel really good, about the visitation because you're helping them, but not because they're giving you what you need. It's just that the helper relationship is a very significant one. So, that's something. We talked a little bit before about, not fixing, not rescuing the client. That's not your role. But, to help the client see that that they have options, they have alternatives, they have, you might give them a different perspective on things, but it's not giving advice or fixing the problem for them. So that's, kind of another piece of boundary. So how much exposure have you had to active listening?
Yeah, not that I
What they might have had in their...
Oh, in general.
In general, to active listening. And, you started talking a little bit about body language, but what does active listening mean to you?
Like
How do you demonstrate that you're actively listening to somebody?
being attentive, engaging without taking over the conversation. Maybe you repeat something that they just said.
Okay.
respond.
Nod your head.
Nod your head.
Eye contact.
You mentioned, maybe not sitting like this, but you're...
Sort of the match how the
Being-
person's sitting,
Yeah.
with how you sit.
Being mentally present.
I was visiting many years ago. I was visiting I was a case manager. I was visiting a client, and it was towards the end of the day, and it was cold outside and warm in her apartment, and she was kind of going on and on about things that she always went on and on about. I don't remember what it was, and I started kind of, falling. My eyes started to close, and she looked at me and she said, "You're falling asleep."
Oh my God.
And that was, my memory is not great on a lot of things, but I do remember that. So really being present and attentive and engaged with the client. It says here, it's amazing to realize that 55% of what you communicate is due to facial expression and body language, which is like woo. 38% is the result of your tone of voice, and only 7% is due to the words that you say. So it's a little scary when you think of it. So there's one active listening technique called SOUL-ER, which it's kind of a weird, and it's emergency response to another person's soul. And again, if you want any of these handouts, I'm happy to give them to you. So S is face your client squarely and adopt a position that indicates involvement. So if you're sitting and kind of looking around and you're not facing the person, that's a signal to them that you're not really engaged. O is to maintain an open posture. Crossed arms and legs signal lack of availability. I understand it. There are some of us who always sit like this, not because I feel particularly closed, just because it's comfortable and I'm always cold. So I do always sit like this. So to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but when I become conscious of it, I'll stop. But that's just just my natural posture.
I feel like
always
it's kind of
sit like
warming too.
Yeah.
It's cold.
I'm always cold. So the U is demonstrate understanding. That's the U by responding to nonverbal as verbal and verbal cues. So you might get the sense that they're tearing up or they're in pain. There's lots of verbal cues that you'll be looking for and you'll be responding to. L is, anybody have an idea what L is? Leaning, no? The whole thing is active listening. Leaning forward is seen as being involved with the other person. Leaning backward signals disengagement. So if you look at the person and you're leaning forward a little bit, that signals a little bit more engagement. E is maintaining good eye contact, and this is not the same as staring. Glancing away occasionally is appropriate and acceptable. Sometimes it's uncomfortable if you're always looking at the person. becomes a little bit intrusive. R is to be relaxed and natural. And I'm sure, how are you supposed to be relaxed and natural after you've had all of these mandates about, the active listening technique goes on to say personal space is very individual, depending on the person and the culture. Again, there are some cultures where getting really up close is perfectly acceptable, and there are some cultures where that really is not acceptable at all. Being sensitive to your client's need for personal space, and then again, ask the client when in doubt. Ask the client, is this okay? Are you comfortable like this? And then mirroring. Mirroring, again, is clarifying what the person's saying. I just want to make sure I understand what you said. Am I hearing you correctly? Is this what you meant when you said? Because you might really have missed the point. Not any fault of yours or theirs. Just you just didn't understand them accurately. Anybody know the difference between like closed-ended and open-ended questions and how you do that?
Closed-ended, I think it's like yes, the person can only respond yes or no, and then open-ended, they can kind of elaborate or.
Right. So, just give me an example of how you would, of a closed-ended question that you can then, in your mind, transform into an open-ended question.
Are you having a good day today? It's like closed-ended.
Yeah.
And
How was your day?
Open.
Good.
How was your day?
No, that's still good.
Yeah.
But
If you say how was your day today, that's more open.
That's more open, or
you could
tell me
frame it
about how
even
your
more
day.
open.
Tell me about how your day
Uh-huh.
went today.
Mm-hmm.
How your week went.
Mm-hmm.
So anything you can do to add. Now, again, I've encountered a lot of people who get a little nervous with open-ended questions because it puts more pressure on them to respond. So, you do have to judge whether or not, like, a constant repertoire is. Like, sometimes I might be more comfortable with some closed-ended questions interspersed so that they don't feel so pressured to, to constantly make conversation. What about things like the use of names? Well, this is always a little touchy with older people.
Nicknames?
Do you address people as
Miss
their
or-
first names?
okay.
Do you use... Now, we're part of a culture that always uses first names. I mean, I don't know anybody in the agency who doesn't use their first name, And then sometimes we've had staff who are PhDs, and their phone message, their voicemail says, "This is Dr. So-and-so," and it's not part of JFS culture. We don't do that, and we never identify ourselves as Dr., Mrs., Mr., Ms. Like, we just use our first names. So you really do have to find out what the person prefers. Hello, Mrs. Brown. Oh, you can call me Sarah. That's fine. Or you can ask, what would you like me to call you? How would you like me to address you? We have a lot of social workers who go into hospitals, and we've had to, help them learn to really ask the question, because, nurses come in, hello, sweetie, without ever having met you, like, why are you calling me that? Or, hello, Sarah. And, typically people want to be asked, what can I call you? What should I call you? So that's, they'll talk about, some direct conversation that's kind of easy to understand, but not talking down at a person, not assuming that. And then there is lots of exercises about people who are hard of hearing, and if you shout, let's say, I hear you. So it needs to be normal tone. If they're a little hard of hearing, you might want to raise your voice a little bit, and and just make sure that they can hear you okay, and that also has to do with distance. When you're going into somebody's personal space, there's also, like what happens if you come into the house and their radio or their TV is blasting? Like, what do you do? Because that happens very often. People leave it on, they don't even know that it's there.
Well, you might say, I can't hear you.
That's true, you could do that. And what?
Do you want me to turn it down or turn it off? Do you mind if I turn
Right,
it?
so that's to ask permission. Is it okay if I turn it down? Now, I don't know. Now they might have the internet on and not their TV,
Right.
so, or they might be answering their phone. Which brings up another really good point. And that's when you're in somebody's home, unless you're expecting an emergency phone call, and then tell them before I might answer my phone because I'm expecting an emergency phone call. Really, really try to shut your phone off. It's extremely distracting, and it says to the other person, you're not important enough for me to not be looking at my phone, answering my phone, looking at my emails, texting, whatever else we all do 24 hours a day. If you can make it their time. Now, some of what you might think about doing, if you like this kind of stuff, we're trying to see how many of our older adults, and I don't know if you all even match with older adults, I'm not sure, how many of our older adults can really be helped to use computers in a more interactive way, or to use them in a more helpful way. So, if they have a computer and they say, oh, I have a computer, my son bought me a computer, but I don't know what to do with it, and kind of you're up for the challenge, it would be a great thing to do, because we really are trying to test out some of our assumptions about when older adults learn to use computers and learn to kind of engage socially via a computer. It really helps break the social isolation. So, and it's also a good activity to do with people, if they want to. Now, again, it has to be their agenda, not ours, but if they want to. So let's get back to your religion and politics. And what you do if somebody brings up a subject that you can kind of figure out that it's going to end in an argument. You have a different political view, you're a different religion. How do you deal with things like that?
I imagine you just listen to them and, just make a non-committal comment like, oh yeah?
Watch your body language when you do that.
Right. Listen with an open mind, don't be judgmental, don't,
Right, exactly, but you also don't have to agree with something that,
right.
And sometimes it's just, I respect your opinion, I hear what you're saying, I don't necessarily agree with you, but you know what, maybe it's better if we don't get into this. Because I do think you're right, I think religion and politics are two areas that are particularly sensitive, especially around election time. And it's going to come up, who'd you vote for? Or did you vote?
Did you vote?
Did you vote? But there's lots of stuff that's going on in the country that people have opinions about, that are either, you might or might not agree. So just kind of listen without overreacting, but just to accept. And it's interesting. I've heard people say that. I've heard that I know some people really have that opinion. Seems like you really feel strongly about this. And, again, we try to caution people to avoid giving advice, because there's a lot of liability in us giving advice. Aside from that's not a good idea, but there's a lot of liability. If which doctor should I use? Should I use this doctor or that doctor? Well, you told me to go to this doctor, and you know what he did to me. Or, you told me to, I don't know, whatever it is, but that's usually not, I can't think of any time when it's really a good idea to give people advice. You can kind of explore alternatives with people. Well, let's think, what are your alternatives and what do you think? And what will happen if you choose A over B? What are some of the consequences of what you're dealing with? But, what people like to talk most about is themselves. They really do. People like to talk about their past. They like to talk about who they were. It's very hard sometimes. People go in and you're only seeing a slice of their life. You're only seeing them as they are today. That's why when people go into nursing homes, very often family members put pictures of who they were, or a degree of what they did in the past, things like that, so that the staff in the nursing home understands that this is the person that might exist today, but you know what, they have 70 years of history behind them, and they weren't always the way you're seeing them now. So that's, to really find out like who they were, and what their life history is. Everybody likes to talk about, really everybody likes to talk about themselves, and it's very rare. The greatest gift you can give to people is sitting and listening to them. It's very rare that that somebody has the opportunity to have somebody really listen to them for a couple of hours. It's, think about your own life, like how often do you have somebody who really is there just to listen to you, or to provide companionship, or to play a game, or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. But it's a very beautiful gift you can give to people. And sometimes you go in and you think like, what am I doing anyway? I'm just sitting and listening to them. That is the gift. The gift is being able to sit and listen to them without being judgmental, without them feeling that they're being judged, or you don't really care. Their children might have heard those stories 17,000 times, and they don't want to hear it again. They don't want to hear about how you rose in the company and became CEO. We know that, but look at you now. So the gift of being able to give that to them. You can encourage writing. You can encourage taping their story, recording their stories, if that's something that they're interested in doing. Okay, so we're going to go into elder abuse a little bit, just because you'll be working with older adults. These are things that you should be aware of. And how many of you have worked before with older adults? Yeah, okay. So, have you been exposed before to elder abuse, mandated reporting, things like that? No. Okay. So we'll go into it a little bit. So, first thing that I wanted to talk about was the issue of loss in older adults, and the kinds of loss that people experience. So as you think of somebody aging, what kinds of loss can you think of? And it's really just putting yourselves in the shoes of the older adults, and thinking about who they were and what kind of losses they might be experiencing when they're 70, 80, 90. We have many clients now in their 90s, touching 100. So what are some of the losses that you can think of?
Maybe their close friends or spouse.
So people dying, or not functioning.
Or jobs.
Job loss is a big issue. Memory. It's a big issue.
The ability to function, bodily function.
So physical changes, sight, hearing,
Not being able to
mobility,
drive.
driving is a big issue. Looking in the mirror, the external manifestation of yourself. Sometimes you look into the mirror and all of a sudden you say, "Oh, who is that person? That's not who I am."
I say that every day.
You must be getting older. Self-esteem. There's a lot of ageism that exists in our society, and we might have some of those same thoughts whether we know it or not, basically. And that affects how we see ourselves as well. Finances. You stop working, your spouse dies, you don't have his or her Social Security anymore. You might have been able to go out to eat once a week, and now you can't do that anymore. You might have been able to travel, and now you can't do that anymore. And ultimately, loss of independence and facing death. So those are some of the losses. It's pretty heavy. Some of the losses that older adults experience.
The ability to drive a car is a big one that's come up.
Yeah. It also opens people up to either intentional or unintentional abuse. And the typical, aging questionnaire that we use. It's in here. I don't know where it is in here. And just to give you some background, by the year 2025, which is just about 10 years from now, there will be more people in America over 65 than children under 17. It's a pretty scary statistic. People turn 55 at the rate of 10,000 a day here. So that's also pretty significant. Fastest growing segment of the older adult population is over 85. We call them the old. There's the young old, the middle old, and the old old.
What's the distinction or parameters of them?
The young old is between 65 and 75. The old is between 75 and 85, and the middle old is between 75 and 85, and the old is 85 now. We might be pushing that now because there are some 85-year-olds who are like 60-year-olds. So women are especially hard hit as caregivers. The average American woman spends 17 years raising her children and then 18 years of her life helping aging parents. It's very significant because you might be going to homes where there are caregivers, and it's a very difficult population. So ready for that. Okay, so when we look at, and there are, we could spend hours on older adults and who they are and how to deal with them, but I want to particularly focus on elder abuse because it raises a lot of issues for people. So as people who are going to can be responsible for seeing red flags in the home, and then, obviously immediately reporting it to your supervisor, who will then decide whether or not this warrants a mandated report. Some of the things that we look at, well, let's start with who the typical abuser is. And there's no such thing as typical, but the typical abuser is a relative or somebody who is living with the person. And this kind of goes back to your point before about getting bad vibes when somebody's in the home and you're feeling like something's not quite right. That person might be overwhelmed with their own problems. Typically, they might be an adult child who has substance abuse problems, mental illness, developmental disabilities, and they might be dependent on the older person for their for financial stability. They live with them because they can't afford to live someplace else. They might be their in-home services provider, and that's giving them income.